Doug and I are going to talk about what reasons that conventions sometimes fail. And it was kind of inspired by a discussion on the AnimeCons.com forums where they were discussing some of the recent My Little Pony conventions which have gone under.
And yeah, there's just been, it seems like every week you're almost hearing of another one in trouble or something.
Right. But we pretty much can boil down why conventions fail into two really big categories. One is just general mismanagement, and the other one being a lack of audience.
So yeah, just starting up, you know, mismanagement is just kind of overreaching with the budget, whether that's location, how many guests or which guests you're trying to get, and estimating how many attendees are going to want to come to this convention.
And that's been trouble that we've heard lots of conventions have had either all three or one of those ones where they think more people are going to get badges than due, or they try to get guests which maybe were too over ambitious for their budget, or a convention center that was too over ambitious. One that was of note was, and we just want to disclaimer that any of the conventions we mentioned, we're not trying to kind of bash on anybody, but we just thought they'd be good examples of kind of
learn live
and learn, right? Was Kanobaka, which actually the convention center kicked,
the hotel
kicked them out in the middle of their convention.
Yeah, because they you know, you got to have money to pay out your bills and everything up front. I mean, good faith only goes so far.
Right. And you know, similarly, there was a convention called was it AnimeCon?
AnimeCon, yeah.
AnimeCon, where the con chair actually tried to skip town because he couldn't pay up for that weekend.
And one of the guests spotted him going, or him or her going, trying to get to the airport in a taxi. Yeah. So
I mean, these are extreme examples, but you don't want to find yourself in financial trouble.
There are some times where it's just the con barely breaks even or is just barely in the red for 1 year, and because of that they can't do the next year. And then that sometimes depends on your definition of whether or not that's a failure, but you know, sometimes maybe you had a great time but they just couldn't do it again the next year.
Another point of mismanagement is sometimes conventions fail to promote themselves properly, whether that's lack of advertising, whether that's the lack of maybe hitting their good target audience, or maybe even kind of pricing themselves out by making themselves so expensive that it's cost prohibitive for people to pay for the hotel rooms and the badges. Unfortunate example of this is PAC.
Providence Anime Conference.
Yeah, they kind of overreached their budget, and so they had to make the convention really expensive, first of all. That priced a lot of people out, and then they were a 21+ convention, and a lot of people didn't even know about it who were of that age group.
And even then, it was the people that went to Providence, I mean, I was there, people that went had an absolute blast.
It was fantastic.
But so many people came to staffers and other friends and like, wait, there was a 21+ con and they were doing this kind of panel and this kind of panel, like really in-depth stuff. It's like, I wish I'd known about it. I would have gone.
Right.
So it's really just get the word out. And this is advice for any convention, anywhere, no matter what your size is get the word out. Because not everyone's going to come back year to year if you're going on. And if you're new, you want to show that, yes, we exist and get people interested. And sometimes that's taking the unfortunate duty of sitting at a table 8 hours a day for a weekend at another convention to get the word out and talking to people up. And sometimes it's hard work, but it'll pay off in the end. And
you also really want to go after who your convention's targeted at. So for example, in that case, they were going after older people. If they advertise somewhere like Anime Boston, you're not going to get that, or somewhere like Aresia, which has an older attendee base, they might have gotten a little more
versus, you know, interest. They put advertisements in, say, the now defunct New Type magazine or something, which a lot of people that read that aren't in their demographic. So you got to really research where your people are and how they're getting their news.
That's right. And then the other thing that can happen to a convention for mismanagement is some kind of disastrous handling of a major aspect of the convention, whether it's the Masquerade or registration, which Anime Boston 2008, LionCon, perfect example. The registration was a disaster that year. And luckily, the con was already established, but had that been the first year of the convention,
people would never come back.
People never would have come back. That would have been a death knell. And actually, even as an established convention, had they not fixed it immediately after, that also could have been a big downfall.
And I mean, you hear these horror stories of just conventions where they show up and it's like, oh, this is a first-year con, and hey, our dealer's room is in a parking garage or something like that. And like, once again, if the con's not established, people aren't going to want to go, like, no matter if you fix it, they don't want to give them another chance. It's like
there's no goodwill already built up for that convention. And then going to our other point, the other thing, when it comes to mismanagement, there's a lot of ways you can avoid it. Doing your research, doing your homework, time planning, and avoid these things. But when it comes to lack of attendance, sometimes there's only so much you can do.
I mean, sometimes you just make your convention too niche, too focused. I mean, I think a good example would be, I mean, I'm not trying to pick on the My Little Pony conventions, but they're very specialized. It's one thing. And then you see like a Star Trek or Star Wars convention they've got a very long established history, have been around for a while, they know they've got staying power. They're not just kind of the flavor of the month. They're something that has clearly had that impact and is going to have people come to it. And they also kind of say, maybe, yes, we're a Star Wars convention, but we also have stuff on this thing.
Right.
That's kind of, you know, not directly Star Wars, but related to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this happens, the big fandoms that are right now, like My Little Pony and Homestuck and all that stuff, that it feels popular when you're at a convention, because within the convention culture, they're very hot right now. But if you think about, you know, ponies compared to something like Doctor Who or Star Trek or Star Wars, something that's a franchise that's been around for, you know, 50 years, you're not going to have generations of people who are fans of this. And also there's a pop culture aspect to that, where friendship is magic is really big with geek culture, but if you ask someone on the street what friendship is magic is or who Rainbow Dash is, they would be like,
yeah.
Where if you ask someone who Darth Vader is, anyone on the planet could probably tell you. And so there's something to that in getting an audience in the front door.
Yeah, it's that you can grab the passerby.
Right. You can get someone that says, oh, like they'll put that in the tourist brochure. Oh, the Star Wars convention is in town. Maybe you should check it out. The My Little Pony convention. People are like, what? I don't know what's going on. And similar to that is oversaturating the market of a certain type of con. And we've done some segments on how even anime conventions now are almost, there's so many that they've had to branch out into things like My Little Pony and Homestuck and Doctor Who.
And that can be good, you know, because that gives them something different. But if you're just say, here's one convention, I'm going to do another convention in the same region around the same time, people aren't interested.
No, they're not going to spend their money to go to the same thing twice. And the similar thing to that is, if you're going to have a convention, scheduling it in the same area or the time period of something that's already established or multiple things are already established is a death
There was
sentence.
that one convention that was in the same region of California, the same weekend as Anime Expo. You're going up against the biggest anime convention in the country.
What do you think?
You're gonna lose. You're not gonna win.
Don't take on the big guys.
And I mean, sometimes as a fan, it can be frustrating that there's only the big conventions around. But I think that just kind of empowers you to make sure when you see a smaller con that's on a different time to go to that even more, because that helps them grow. Well,
because they're not just competing for you know, attendees; they're competing for guests and bands and
everything.
Resources, you know, staff. And similar to that, you don't want to compete with your neighbors when they could be helping you.
And I think a good example of that would be last year, Anime Boston and PAX East were scheduled for the same weekend, both in Boston, and they made a point of, we're going to work together, we're going to promote together, and you saw a lot more people show up for one-day passes. They did some stuff at PAX and then came to Anime Boston and could do both, and they actually had that portal set up that you could look in and see what was going on at the other convention. And so in that works, I mean, but at the same time, they had some overlap in audience, but they definitely weren't the same audience.
No, they weren't both anime conventions. One was very much a gaming and an industry convention, where the other one was a fan base and more anime convention. But they made it work, and it can work. But you have to do your homework, you have to do your research, and don't overestimate what it's kind of like. I feel like I'm giving Patrick D's don't start a convention. Don't. But if you do,
yeah, I mean, but for any convention, plan. Give yourself minimum a year to get things off the ground. And I mean, we talked about just some of these conventions overreaching, getting too big. You know, start small, and also do that for every year and say, okay, now that we know we have this much money to take care of all of this, and we have, suppose, now we can add this. Like, don't start off with 10 guests, start off with maybe 5 and say, oh, now that we have more, we'll invite 2 more and grow like that.
Yeah, don't feel like you have to get the big convention center. Hotel is great, you know. So,
yeah.
No matter how well run your convention is, if people don't show up,
yeah,
it's not going to work. So plan accordingly.
If you want to talk more about this subject, talk to us on our forums. That's forums.animecons.com. You can subscribe to our Twitter feed, which is twitter.com/animeconstv. Send us an email at podcast@animecons.com. Give us feedback. Let us know. You know, give us share your horror stories if you've been stuck at a failing convention, or tell us, you know, if you're a convention planner, tell us what you did right. Tell us, you know, how you succeeded. There's a lot of different ways to take this story and take the lessons here. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.